There's a word, one single word, that has the power to completely change your life, and most people are absolutely terrified to say it. That word is no. Just 2 letters. But they carry the weight of the entire world on their back. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why the most powerful, most free, most respected people throughout all of human history built their entire lives around that one word. If this is the kind of content that speaks to your soul, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss another video like this one. I drop new episodes every week on wisdom, mindset, and the kind of life lessons they don't teach you in school. Now let's get into it, because what I'm about to share with you changed everything for me, and I have a feeling it's going to do the same for you. Picture this. You're sitting at your desk. It's already 8 o'clock at night. You're exhausted. Your eyes are burning. You haven't eaten a real meal since noon, and your phone buzzes. It's your coworker, or your friend, or your family member, asking you for one more thing, one more favor, one more yes. And even though every cell in your body is screaming at you to say no, you feel this overwhelming wave of guilt wash over you. And before you even realize what's happening, your fingers are already typing back, "Sure, no problem. I'll take care of it." Sound familiar? Because that moment right there, that tiny, almost invisible surrender, is costing you more than you know. It's costing you your time, your energy, your self-respect, and ultimately, your entire life. The ancient Stoics understood something that most modern human beings have completely forgotten. They understood that the inability to say no is not kindness. It is fear disguised as generosity. And once you truly understand that, once that idea lands in your chest and settles there, nothing will ever be the same again. We're going to go deep today. We're going to talk about Marcus Aurelius. We're going to talk about Seneca. We're going to talk about the psychology of guilt, the neuroscience of people pleasing, and I'm going to give you the exact mental tools that the most powerful people in history used to say no without flinching, without apologizing, and without losing a single relationship that truly mattered. But first, let me tell you something that Seneca wrote almost 2,000 years ago that is going to hit you like a freight train. Seneca said this. He said, "It is not that I am brave. It is that I know what is worth fearing." Read that again. It is not that I am brave. It is that I know what is worth fearing. Because here's the thing about guilt. Guilt is not a moral compass. Guilt is a social mechanism. And if you don't understand the difference, you will spend your entire life dancing on someone else's string without ever realizing you're the puppet. Stick with me, because I'm about to break down exactly what that means, and it's going to reframe everything you thought you knew about being a good person. Let's go back even further. Let's go back to ancient Rome. Around the year 161 AD, a man named Marcus Aurelius stepped into one of the most powerful positions in human history. He became the emperor of Rome. And here's the thing about Marcus that most people don't know. He never wanted the job. He was a philosopher first, a leader second. And every single day of his reign, he was surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Advisors who wanted his ear, generals who wanted his approval, senators who wanted his resources, merchants who wanted his favor. Every single person in his court had an agenda. And Marcus, more than almost any ruler before or after him, had to learn one of the most brutal lessons that power teaches, that saying yes to everyone is the fastest way to serve no one well. He wrote in his private journals, the journals we now call meditations, that no one should ever look outside themselves for peace. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." But here's what people always miss when they quote that line. They focus on the mind part, They talk about mindset. They talk about inner peace. But they miss the second half of the equation. If your peace is internal, then it cannot be granted or taken by the requests of others. Which means every time you say yes when you mean no, you are actively surrendering the one thing Marcus Aurelius spent his entire life protecting, his inner sovereignty. Now I want you to think about someone in your life. It doesn't have to be a bad person. In fact, the most difficult cases are almost never bad people. Think about someone who consistently drains your energy. Someone who takes more than they give. Someone whose requests always seem to find you at your weakest moment. And think about the last time you said yes to that person, when everything inside you said no. How did you feel afterward? Not in the moment, not during the task, but afterward? Lying in bed that night, replaying it in your head. That feeling you felt, that low hum of resentment mixed with fatigue, mixed with something that almost feels like shame. That is not the feeling of a kind person doing a kind thing. That is the feeling of a boundary violated. And here's the disturbing part. You were the one who violated it. I want to stop right here because this next part is crucial. And I don't want you to miss it. Because if you take nothing else from this video, take this. Guilt. The guilt you feel when you say no to someone is almost never about them. It is almost always about a story you were told as a child about what it means to be good. Think about it. When you were young, you were rewarded for saying yes. You were praised for being helpful. You were called sweet, kind, generous, a good boy, a good girl. When you gave up what you had for someone else, and you were made to feel selfish, difficult, disappointing, when you held your ground and said no, that reward system got wired into your nervous system like a computer program. And now, decades later, every time you try to say no, that old program fires up and sends a signal through your body that says danger, you are being bad, fix it, say yes, make the feeling stop. That guilt is not wisdom. It is conditioning. And the Stoics knew exactly how to break that conditioning. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most celebrated philosophers in the ancient world, said something that I think about almost every single day. He said, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." Read that slowly. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. What does that mean in plain English? It means that when someone asks you for something and you feel guilty for saying no, you are not actually responding to the request. You are responding to a story in your mind about what that request means, about what it means about you, about what they'll think of you, about what kind of person says no, about whether you'll lose their respect, their love, their approval. And the moment you start to see that clearly, something shifts. Because that story is not real. It is a projection. And you have been letting a projection run your entire life. Here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that most people never hear, because most conversations about saying no stop at just set boundaries and practice self-care. That's fine as far as it goes. But it doesn't go nearly far enough. Because the Stoics didn't just tell you to say no. They gave you a complete philosophical architecture for why saying no is actually the more moral, the more virtuous, the more genuinely loving choice in almost every situation. And I want to walk you through that architecture piece by piece, because once you understand it, you will never feel guilty about saying no again. Not in the same way. Not with that old familiar dread. Let's start with the concept the Stoics called sympathia. It's a Greek word that means interconnection. The idea that all things, all people, are part of one enormous living system. Marcus Aurelius believed this deeply. He believed that every human being was a thread in an infinite fabric. and that the health of the whole depended on the health of each individual thread. Now here's where most people take this idea and run in the wrong direction. They say, see, we're all connected, so we should sacrifice ourselves for others. But that is not what Marcus meant. Not even close. What he understood, what he wrote about over and over again in meditations, is that a thread that frays, a thread that breaks from overextension, doesn't just weaken itself. It weakens the entire fabric. A person who says yes until they're empty doesn't just damage themselves. They become a liability to every single person who depends on them. Think about that for a second. When you are running on empty, when you are exhausted and resentful and burned out from saying yes to everyone but yourself, what kind of presence do you actually bring to the people you love? Are you patient with your kids? Are you focused at work? Are you genuinely present with your friends? Or are you going through the motions, a hollowed out version of yourself, technically there, but not really there at all? Because here's the truth that almost nobody wants to admit: a burned out yes is worth far less than an honest no. The person who says no and means it, who protects their energy and shows up fully when they do show up, that person is exponentially more valuable to the people around them than the exhausted, resentful, over-committed yes man who has nothing real left to give. And now I want to tell you about a moment, a real moment from Marcus Aurelius's life that completely changed the way I think about this. Because Marcus, even as emperor, had to say no constantly. He had to say no to military campaigns that his generals wanted. He had to say no to luxury that his court craved. He had to say no to vengeance when traitors surrounded him. One of the most documented examples of this is his relationship with a man named Avidius Cassius. Cassius was one of Marcus's most trusted generals, a brilliant man, a decorated soldier, and in 175 AD, while Marcus was believed to be critically ill, Cassius declared himself emperor. He usurped the throne. He betrayed everything. And when Marcus recovered, when he gathered his forces and marched toward Cassius, something happened that shocked the entire Roman world. Cassius was killed by one of his own officers. And Marcus's response? He refused to read the letters that had been seized. The letters that would have named every senator, every official, every person in Rome who had secretly supported the rebellion. He refused. He had them burned, unread, because Marcus said that knowing their names would only tempt him toward a vengeance he had already decided not to take. He said no to an entire empire's expectation of retaliation. And in doing so, he demonstrated something that almost no one in power has ever managed to pull off. He showed that the ability to say no is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. Now let's get practical. Because I don't just want to inspire you, I want to give you tools. Real, usable, stoic tools for saying no without guilt. And the first one is what I call the clarity test. The ancient Stoics believed that before any action, before any decision, you had to achieve clarity about your values. Marcus Aurelius wrote constantly about knowing what you stand for before someone asks you to stand against it. Because here's what happens when you don't have that clarity. When someone asks you for something, and you haven't decided where your lines are, you make that decision in the worst possible environment, under social pressure, with their eyes on you, with the weight of their expectation pressing against your chest. And under those conditions, almost everyone caves. So the Stoic solution is to decide in advance. Before you're in the moment, you sit down and you get clear on your values. What matters most to me? What are my non-negotiables? What are the things I am simply not available for, no matter how the request is framed? When you have that list, when those decisions are already made, saying no becomes effortless. Because you're not making a decision in the moment. You're executing a decision you already made from a place of peace. The second tool is what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control. And this one might be the most powerful of all, because it directly attacks the root of the guilt. Epictetus divided all of reality into two categories: things within our control and things outside our control. Our judgments, our desires, our actions, our responses within our control. Other people's opinions, their feelings, their reactions, their decisions outside our control. And he was absolutely merciless about this distinction. He said that every moment of suffering in a human life comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. Now apply that directly to the guilt of saying no. When you say no to someone, you cannot control how they feel about it. You cannot control whether they're disappointed or angry or hurt, or if they respect you more for it, or if they quietly admire your backbone. None of that is in your control. The only thing in your control is whether your no is honest, whether it is delivered with respect, and whether it is aligned with your values. And Epictetus would tell you, if you have done those three things, you have done everything that is yours to do. The rest belongs to the universe. And you do not owe the universe an apology for doing your part honestly. Now here's where I want to make a distinction that I think is really important, because I can already hear some of you thinking, but what about compassion? What about generosity? Are the Stoics just telling me to be selfish? And the answer is an emphatic no. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings about Stoic philosophy, and it drives me crazy because it stops people from accessing some of the most powerful wisdom in human history. The Stoics were not anti-generosity. They were anti-self-destruction. There is a massive, enormous, canyon-sized difference between giving from a place of abundance and giving from a place of fear. When you say yes because you genuinely want to, because it aligns with your values, because it lights you up and you have the energy and capacity to deliver, that is generosity. That is beautiful. The world needs more of that. But when you say yes because you're afraid of their disappointment, because you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to your usefulness, because the guilt is just too loud to ignore, that is not generosity. That is self-abandonment dressed up in generous clothes. And the Stoics would call you out on that distinction every single time. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." And I love that line, but I want to add something to it for the context of this conversation. Being a good man, being a good woman, being a good human being does not mean saying yes to everything. It means showing up fully for the things you choose to say yes to. It means being so completely present, so completely available, so completely real in the commitments you do make, that your yes actually means something. Because here's a secret that no one tells you. When you say yes to everything, your yes becomes worthless. It becomes meaningless. It becomes a social reflex, not a genuine offering. But when people know that you sometimes say no, when they know that your yes is deliberate and chosen and protected, your yes becomes one of the most valuable things in the world. Let's talk about the guilt itself for a moment, because I think we need to go deeper here. I want to explore where it actually comes from, because understanding the origin of the guilt is how you stop it from controlling you. There's a concept in psychology called fawn response. Most people know about fight, flight, and freeze as responses to perceived threat. But the fawn response is less discussed, and it is absolutely rampant in modern society. Fawning is when you manage a perceived threat, not by fighting it or running from it, but by appeasing it, by becoming maximally agreeable, helpful, accommodating, by doing whatever the other person needs in order to make them feel good, because somewhere deep in your nervous system, You learned that your safety depended on other people's approval. This is not a character flaw. It is a survival strategy. For many people, especially those who grew up in chaotic or emotionally unpredictable environments, fawning was genuinely the safest option. But the problem is that what was once a survival strategy becomes a prison. And when you carry that fawn response into adult life, into professional environments and friendships and romantic relationships, you end up living a life that is fundamentally organized around preventing other people's discomfort rather than pursuing your own truth. And the Stoics, without ever using the word fawn, understood this dynamic perfectly. Seneca wrote in one of his letters to his friend Lucilius, "Retire into yourself as much as you can. Mix with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those who you yourself can improve." The process is a mutual one. Men learn while they teach. And in another letter, one of my absolute favorites, he wrote, "You ask me to say a few words about how to grow old gracefully. I shall try. The chief thing is this: avoid sycophants. They are the most dangerous of all your companions." He was talking about people who only tell you what you want to hear. But the flip side of that coin is this: don't be the sycophant in your own life. Don't manage your own discomfort by constantly telling everyone around you what they want to hear. Now I want to give you a real framework, something you can actually use the next time someone makes a request and you feel that familiar wave of guilt start to rise. I call it the Stoic No Protocol. And it has 3 parts. The first part is the pause. Before you respond to any request, you take a breath. You create space, even if it's just 2 seconds of silence, because those 2 seconds interrupt the automatic guilt response and give your rational mind a chance to show up. The Stoics were obsessed with the idea of the pause. Marcus Aurelius called it the space between stimulus and response, and he trained himself relentlessly to use it. The second part is the values check. In that pause, you ask yourself one question: does this align with what I have decided matters most? Not what they think should matter most. Not what society says should matter most. What you have decided in your clear-headed, values-driven, pre-committed self actually matters most. And the third part is the honest response. Not the apologetic response. Not the over-explained, guilt-soaked 15 excuses response. The honest one. I'm not able to do that. Or simply no, but thank you for thinking of me. Or, that doesn't work for me right now. No spiral. No over-justification. No lengthy apology tour. Because here's what the Stoics understood that modern psychology has only recently started to confirm over. Explaining your no is actually a form of disrespect to both parties. It signals that you don't believe your no is enough on its own. That you need to defend it, justify it, dress it up in enough reasons that the other person will finally grant you permission to have your own boundary. But your no doesn't need their permission. It never did. And I want to pause here for a second and really let that land. Your no does not need their permission. Read that again. Your no does not need their permission. Because the moment you start believing that your boundaries require someone else's approval to be valid, you have handed them a power over your life that no human being was ever meant to have over another. The Stoics believed in the absolute sovereignty of the rational mind. They believed that within the territory of your own choices, you are the emperor. And no emperor worthy of the title asks his subjects for permission to govern his own kingdom. Now let's talk about the relationships piece, because I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, okay, this sounds great in theory, but in practice, if I start saying no, I'm going to lose people. My relationships are going to suffer. People are going to think I'm cold or selfish, or that I don't care. And I want to address that fear directly, because it is one of the most common and one of the most understandable fears that comes up around this topic. First, let me acknowledge something. It is true that when you start saying no, some people will not like it. Some people will be disappointed. Some might even pull away, and that feels terrible, especially at first. I'm not going to sugarcoat that for you. But here is what the Stoics would have you understand about those people. If someone's presence in your life is entirely conditional on your willingness to say yes to them, then what you have is not a relationship. What you have is a transaction, and you are the only one paying. Real relationships, the kind built on genuine mutual respect and affection, do not collapse the moment you establish a limit. Real love does not evaporate the moment you say, "I can't do that right now." And if someone responds to your honest no with punishment, with withdrawal, with guilt, tripping, or manipulation, that response is not evidence that you were wrong to say no. It is evidence that you were right. Because what they're showing you in that moment is that they were never interested in you. They were interested in your usefulness. Marcus Aurelius had a word for the people who only showed up when they could extract value. He called them fair-weather associates, people drawn to the warmth of your light, but gone the moment the wind picked up. And his advice was not to chase them back. His advice was to note their departure with equanimity, because the forest that loses its deadwood in a storm does not mourn the loss. It breathes easier afterward. Now I want to shift gears and talk about something that I think is deeply underappreciated in the conversation about saying no, and that is the concept of time. Because Seneca, more than almost any other Stoic, was obsessed with time. His very first letter to Lucilius begins with these words: "Do this above all, withdraw yourself from those who run after time, who devour it as quickly as possible, who waste it thoughtlessly." And then he says something that stopped me cold the first time I read it. He says, "Hold on to every single day as if you can make it fly back, as if you were able to add it to the heap of your life." Everything, Lucilius, is not ours. Time alone is ours. Time alone is ours. That one line. That one devastating, beautiful, gut punch of a line. Because here is what that means in the context of this conversation. Every single time you say yes when you mean no, you are giving away time. And time, unlike money, unlike energy, unlike social currency, is the one resource that can never be replenished. You cannot earn more of it. You cannot save it up. You cannot borrow it from next week. Every minute you spend saying yes to someone else's agenda is a minute that is gone forever from your own life. And Seneca would look at your calendar, filled with other people's priorities and other people's needs and other people's emergencies, and he would say, "When are you going to start living your own life?" And the only answer that the Stoics would accept is now, right now, starting with the very next request, starting with the very next moment where you feel that familiar guilt rising in your chest and you choose, deliberately and consciously, to let it rise and let it pass and say, no anyway. Now let me tell you one more story. Because there is a moment in the life of Cato the Younger that I think perfectly captures everything we've been talking about today. Cato was a Roman senator who lived a few centuries before Marcus Aurelius, and he was one of the most famously principled men in all of Roman history. Julius Caesar called him his most feared opponent, not because Cato was a brilliant military strategist, but because Cato was absolutely, completely, terrifyingly incorruptible. Cato couldn't be bought. He couldn't be flattered. He couldn't be persuaded by appeals to comfort or convenience or social pressure. And there is a famous story, one of my favorites in all of ancient history, about a moment when Caesar and Cato faced off in the Roman Senate. Caesar wanted something. The specifics are almost irrelevant. What matters is the dynamic. Caesar was the most powerful man in Rome, possibly the world, and Cato looked at him, in front of everyone, in the most powerful room in the empire, and said no. Flat, simple, unapologetic no, and Caesar was furious. He had Cato dragged from the Senate. Cato was literally being carried out of the building, and as he went, other senators, moved by his courage, started to follow him. They walked out of the Senate behind him. Because when they saw someone willing to say no to Julius Caesar without flinching, something in them recognized it as something worth following. That is the power of a genuine no. It doesn't just protect you, it inspires the people around you. There's a version of this in your life right now. Maybe it's not as dramatic as standing up to a military dictator. Maybe it's just sending the email that declines the extra project. Maybe it's putting down the phone when someone is draining your energy. Maybe it's saying to your boss, your friend, your family member, "I love you, but I can't do this." But every time you do that, every time you say an honest, values-aligned no, you are doing something that goes beyond protecting yourself. You are showing the people around you that it is possible. You are modeling what it looks like to live from the inside out, rather than the outside in. And for someone who has never seen that modeled before, that can be one of the most transformative things they have ever witnessed. I want to come back to the guilt one more time, because there's a piece of this puzzle that I haven't addressed yet, and it might be the most important one. The guilt you feel when you say no is often not just about the person asking. It's about your identity, about who you believe yourself to be. Because most people who struggle to say no have built their entire sense of self-worth around being helpful, being needed, being the person people can count on, and that is not a bad quality. Being reliable is genuinely valuable. Being generous is genuinely beautiful. But when your identity becomes fused with your willingness to say yes, then saying no doesn't just feel like declining a request. It feels like a betrayal of who you are. It feels like self-annihilation, and no wonder you can't do it. No wonder the guilt is so overwhelming, because you're not just saying no to them. You're saying no to the version of yourself that you've been holding up as your highest value. And here is what the Stoics would say to that. They would say, "You have confused a strategy with a virtue. Being helpful is not a virtue. Being good is a virtue. And goodness does not require perpetual availability. Goodness requires honesty. It requires integrity. It requires the courage to be true to your actual values even when it is uncomfortable. And sometimes, being honest and true to your values looks exactly like saying no," Seneca wrote in one of his letters. And whatever begins also ends. And I've always thought about that line in the context of identity. Whatever version of yourself began under those early conditions, those childhood rewards and punishments that taught you what it meant to be good, that version can also end. You are not locked into the person you were shaped to be. That is the most radical promise of Stoic philosophy. That through reason, through reflection, through the deliberate practice of choosing your responses rather than having them chosen for you, you can become someone new. Not overnight, not without struggle, but truly, genuinely new. You can become the person who says no with grace and clarity and zero apology. Not because you've stopped caring about others, but because you've finally started caring about yourself in the same profound, unconditional way. And so here is where I want to land this. Here is the resolution that the Stoics offer to everything we've talked about today. The goal is not to say no more. The goal is to mean what you say. The goal is to live in alignment with your actual values so that every yes you give is a full, energized, genuine offering, and every no you give is a clear, clean, unashamed act of self-governance. And when you get there, when you start living that way, something remarkable happens. You stop being drained. You stop carrying that low hum of resentment. You stop lying in bed at night, replaying conversations, and wishing you'd said something different. You start showing up to your commitments with real presence and real power. And the people in your life, the real ones, the ones worth keeping, start to trust you more. Because they know that when you say yes, you actually mean it. And when you say no, you're not being difficult. You're being honest. And there is nothing in this world more trustworthy than someone who tells you the truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations. The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. Look things in the face and know them for what they are. Know your guilt for what it is, conditioning, not conscience. Know your yes for what it is, either a genuine gift or a slow surrender. Know your no for what it is, not a rejection of the person, but a commitment to the truth. And know yourself, above all, for what you actually are, not a vending machine of favors, not a receptacle for other people's needs, but a sovereign human being with your own time, your own energy, your own values, and your own life to live. One single, precious, irreplaceable life. And you get to decide how it gets spent. Starting right now. Before I go, I want to ask you something directly. Think about one person in your life, just one, to whom you have been saying yes when you meant no. I want you to drop their name in the comments below. You don't have to explain anything. You don't have to share the whole story. Just the name, or even just a "me too," if you're not ready to name it. Because I promise you, you are not alone in this. And sometimes the most powerful thing is just to say, I see this, I acknowledge it, and I am ready for it to change. If this video hit you somewhere real, send it to someone who needs to hear it. Not someone you want to fix, but someone you love. Someone you see drowning in their own yeses, someone who is running on empty and doesn't even know why. Send it to them right now. Because the most generous thing you can give someone is not your time or your yes. It's a tool that helps them reclaim their own. And if you're new here, and this is the first video of mine you've ever watched, welcome. Hit subscribe and the notification bell, because this is what we do here. Every single week, we go deep into the wisdom of the greatest minds in human history, and we pull out the tools that actually change how you live. You don't want to miss what's coming next. The Stoics knew something 2,000 years ago that the most liberated, most respected, most genuinely powerful people alive today are only just starting to rediscover. Your no is not a wall, it is a door. It is the door to a life that is actually, truly, unmistakably yours.